Walk into any marina today and you'll see transoms covered in Mercury cowlings. Blue, white, black, the distinctive Mercury logo everywhere you look. But 10 years ago, you'd also see plenty of white and red Evinrude badges. Engines that people swore by, engines that had loyal followings, engines that are now ghosts. Evinrude stopped building outboards in 2020. Mercury remains one of the largest and most dominant outboard manufacturers today. Both companies made powerful, respected engines. Both had decades of history and innovation. So what was the real difference? Why did one survive and one disappear? Today we're going beyond the marketing and the brand loyalty to understand what actually separated these two companies, not just in how their engines ran, but in the fundamental choices that determined which brand would still exist today. Let's get into it. Let's talk about the moment. One brand stopped and another one kept building. Evinrude was one of the oldest names in outboard history, dating back to the early 1900s. For decades, the brand defined innovation in two-stroke technology. Ole Evinrude is widely credited with creating one of the first commercially successful modern outboard motors. The company built a reputation on reliability, power, and constant evolution. But in 2020, Evinrude's parent company made a decision that shocked the boating world. They stopped producing new outboard engines entirely and exited the outboard market that year. Mercury Marine took a completely different path. The company invested heavily in long-term platform continuity, emissions compliance, dealer infrastructure, and electronic integration. Mercury didn't just build engines, they built an ecosystem designed to last decades. They planned for regulatory changes years in advance. They created dealer networks that could support engines anywhere in the world. This difference alone shapes everything else we're about to discuss. One brand became legacy supported, meaning existing engines get parts and service, but no new development happens. The other is actively evolving with new models, new technology, and continuous improvement. Understanding why this happened requires looking at the technical and business decisions each company made, often decades before the final outcome became clear. Moving on to two completely different engine philosophies. The most fundamental technical difference between Mercury and Evinrude comes down to engine type, and this choice affected everything from how the engines felt to how the market perceived them. Evinrude committed almost entirely to advanced two-stroke direct injection engines, especially with its E-Tech and E-Tech G2 platforms. Two-stroke engines fire every crankshaft revolution. Every time the piston goes down, combustion happens. This creates strong power delivery, excellent throttle response, and lighter overall weight because you need fewer components to produce the same power. Mercury moved decisively toward four-stroke engines. Four strokes fire every other crankshaft revolution: intake, compression, combustion, exhaust. That full cycle means more complexity, more weight, but also smoother operation, quieter running, and broader acceptance among regulators and consumers. Mercury gradually phased out their two-stroke designs in favor of four-stroke platforms that met emissions standards without relying on oil injection systems. Neither approach is inherently better in absolute terms. They're optimized for different priorities. Evinrude bet that advanced two-stroke technology could overcome the market's perception that two strokes were dirty and outdated. Mercury bet that four strokes were the future regardless of whether two-stroke technology improved. One bet paid off, the other didn't. Not because the technology failed, but because the market moved in a direction that favored Mercury's choice. Now to weight, power, and how they feel on the water. Because two-stroke engines produce a power stroke on every rotation, Evinrude engines often delivered strong mid-range torque relative to their weight. In many horsepower classes, Evinrude engines were significantly lighter than comparable four-stroke competitors. This made them incredibly appealing for performance-oriented boats, bass boats where every pound on the transom matters, and applications where weight distribution affected handling. An Evinrude 150 horsepower E-Tech could weigh dozens of pounds less than a comparable Mercury four-stroke, sometimes by a very noticeable margin. On a small boat, that weight difference is massive. It affects how the boat sits in the water, how it handles, how quickly it gets on plane. For performance boaters, that weight advantage was everything. Mercury's four-stroke engines tend to weigh more at equivalent horsepower, but they compensate with smoother torque curves, reduced vibration, and consistent performance across a wider operating range. These characteristics matter more for cruising, family boating, and long-duration operation where smooth, predictable power beats aggressive acceleration. In practice, Evinrude engines often felt sharper and more aggressive. You'd hit the throttle and the boat would jump. The power delivery was immediate and exciting. Mercury engines tend to feel more refined and predictable. The power builds smoothly. The engine hums rather than barks. Neither feeling is wrong, they're just different priorities showing up in how the engine responds. For someone who wanted their boat to feel like a sports car, Evinrude delivered. For someone who wanted their boat to feel like a luxury sedan, Mercury delivered. The market, it turned out, wanted luxury sedans more than sports cars. Up next is the maintenance philosophy divide. Evinrude promoted extended service intervals and reduced scheduled maintenance, especially with E-Tech engines. Some E-Tech models advertise no dealer-scheduled service for several years under normal use. No traditional oil changes because two strokes don't have crankcases full of oil, though gear oil, software updates, and inspections still apply. No valve adjustments because two strokes don't have valves. Just run the engine and it takes care of itself through sophisticated computer control. This appealed enormously to many owners. Who doesn't want an engine that requires less maintenance? But it also created a situation where when problems occurred, diagnosis and repair could be more specialized. The engines were technologically sophisticated. Fixing them required specific knowledge, specific tools, and specific training that not every marine mechanic had. Mercury followed a more traditional maintenance philosophy. Regular oil changes every 100 hours, scheduled inspections, incremental service that keeps the engine in known good condition. This approach fits perfectly with Mercury's large dealer network and makes long-term support more predictable and accessible. You can walk into almost any marina in North America and find someone who can change the oil in a Mercury four-stroke. Finding someone who can properly diagnose and repair an E-Tech G2 direct injection system is harder, and getting harder as time passes. Today, this difference matters even more than it did when both brands were actively producing engines. Mercury owners benefit from ongoing parts production, diagnostic support, and software compatibility within an actively supported ecosystem. Evinrude owners rely on legacy support, remaining parts inventory, and aftermarket solutions. That doesn't mean Evinrude engines are unsupported, but the trajectory is clear. Support will diminish over time, not expand. The next part is electronics and system integration. Both brands adopted electronic controls and digital integration, but they emphasized different goals in how they implemented technology. Evinrude's later engines integrated digital steering, electronic throttle, and advanced onboard diagnostics while retaining a two-stroke combustion system. The E-Tech G2 platform was technically sophisticated and ahead of its time in many respects. The engine computer controlled oil injection with incredible precision, adjusted timing dynamically, and monitored dozens of parameters to optimize performance and emissions. The engineering was impressive, but it was focused primarily on making the engine itself as advanced as possible. The engine was the star. Everything else supported the engine. Mercury focused on building a broad digital ecosystem where the engine was one component in a larger system. Engine data, controls, joystick docking systems, vessel integration, multi-engine coordination, all of these were designed to work together across multiple engine families. This systems-level approach made Mercury engines attractive for multi-engine boats, modern helm setups, and manufacturers who wanted integrated solutions rather than just powerful engines. The difference is subtle but important. Evinrude refined the engine itself to an extraordinary degree. Mercury refined the entire propulsion experience, making the engine one part of a coordinated system. For a boat manufacturer deciding which engines to offer, Mercury's approach made integration easier and provided more value beyond just the horsepower rating. Let's move on to market perception and regulatory reality. Even though Evinrude's direct injection two-strokes met emission standards, market perception increasingly favoured four-stroke engines. Many buyers associated two-strokes, fairly or not, with noise, smoke, and outdated technology. This perception existed despite the fact that modern E-Tech engines were cleaner than many older four-strokes and produced no visible smoke. Mercury aligned its product strategy with market perception and with long-term regulatory trends. This made Mercury engines easier to sell globally and simpler to certify across multiple regions with different emissions requirements. Four-stroke technology was accepted everywhere. Two-stroke technology, even advanced two-strokes, faced skepticism and regulatory hurdles in some markets. Evinrude's technology worked brilliantly. The engines met standards, they performed exceptionally. But the market moved in a different direction, and no amount of engineering excellence could overcome the perception that four strokes were the future and two strokes were the past. This is where business strategy matters as much as engineering. You can build the best product in the world, but if the market doesn't want it, or regulators make it difficult to sell, technical superiority becomes irrelevant. If you're starting to see why one brand survived and the other didn't, make sure you're subscribed because we're about to get into the long-term implications that every Evinrude and Mercury owner needs to understand. This brings us to dealer networks and long-term support. Mercury maintains one of the largest dealer and service networks in the marine industry. Parts availability, diagnostics equipment, and trained technicians remain widely accessible across North America and internationally. If you're traveling with a Mercury-powered boat and something breaks, you can likely find support within a reasonable distance. This network didn't happen by accident. Mercury invested in dealer relationships, training programs, parts distribution, and technical support for decades. They treated the dealer network as essential infrastructure, not just a sales channel. Evinrude engines are still supported through remaining dealers and aftermarket suppliers, but no new engines are being produced. Over time, this naturally shifts ownership toward aftermarket parts, specialized independent service, and diminishing factory involvement. Parts that are available today might not be available in 10 years. Mechanics who know E-Tech systems today might retire without training replacements. For owners planning to keep an engine for decades, this distinction matters as much as how the engine performs. An engine that runs perfectly but can't get parts becomes a very expensive problem. Mercury owners can reasonably expect long-term parts availability and service support based on current industry practices. Evinrude owners face increasing uncertainty as time passes. This doesn't mean you should panic if you own an Evinrude. It means you need to plan differently. Stock critical spare parts. Develop relationships with mechanics who know the engines. Consider what your exit strategy looks like when parts become difficult to source. Okay, now let's move to what owners actually say. Evinrude engines developed a fiercely loyal following, especially among performance boaters and those who appreciated lighter weight and strong acceleration. When properly maintained, many E-Tech engines delivered excellent service. Owners loved the reduced maintenance requirements, the aggressive power delivery, and the weight savings. Bass fishermen particularly favoured Evinrude because every pound on the transom affected their boat's performance. Mercury engines built a reputation for consistency, broad application support, and long-term availability. They became a default choice for boat manufacturers and repower projects because of predictable support and system integration. Owners appreciated the smooth operation, the extensive dealer network, and the confidence that parts and service would be available anywhere they travelled. Neither reputation is accidental. Each reflects deliberate engineering and business choices made over decades. Evinrude chose to optimize for specific performance characteristics that created passionate advocates. Mercury chose to optimize for broad appeal and long-term supportability that created massive market share. In the end, passionate advocates couldn't overcome market dynamics and business realities. Evinrude's parent company decided the Outboard business didn't fit their long-term strategy and shut down production. Mercury's parent company continues investing heavily in research, development, and manufacturing capacity. The real difference. Summed up. The real difference between Mercury and Evinrude is not about which brand was better in some absolute sense. Both companies built excellent engines. Both had innovative technology. Both had satisfied customers. The difference is about what each company optimized for and how those optimization choices aligned with market realities. Evinrude optimized for performance efficiency, lighter weight, advanced two-stroke engineering, and reduced maintenance. They built engines that technical enthusiasts loved and that delivered genuine advantages in specific applications. They pushed two-stroke technology further than anyone thought possible and proved that two strokes could be clean, efficient, and sophisticated. Mercury optimized for long-term scalability, four-stroke refinement, regulatory alignment, dealer network development, and system integration. They built engines that worked for the broadest possible market, that aligned with regulatory trends, and that could be supported anywhere in the world for decades. OnePath produced innovative engines that enthusiasts still admire and defend. The other produced a platform that continues to evolve, improve, and dominate modern marinas. Understanding that difference helps explain why Mercury engines are everywhere you look today, while Evinrude engines remain respected, but firmly part of marine history rather than its future. For current Evinrude owners, this doesn't mean your engine is suddenly worthless or unsupportable. It means you need to be more proactive about maintenance, parts inventory, and finding qualified service. Your engine can last for years if you plan properly. For people choosing engines today, the decision is straightforward. Mercury provides the infrastructure, support, and long-term viability that makes ownership simpler. The engines might weigh more and lack the aggressive character of Evinrude two-strokes, but they'll be supported with parts and service for decades to come. The market made its choice. Not because one technology was better, but because one business strategy aligned with where the industry was heading and the other didn't. That's the real difference between Mercury and Evinrude engines. Own an Evinrude and want to share your experience? Or running Mercury and have thoughts on the comparison? Drop it in the comments. Real-world ownership stories matter more than any manufacturer claims.